think we're live now, Dan. Should we?
Good to go.
Yeah.
So, hi everyone, and welcome to Shieldpay's webinar on how you can streamline M&A transactions by using a payments provider to mitigate risk, complexity, and administrative burden. First and foremost, thank you for joining us this morning. We'll start with some brief introductions, if that's okay. I'm Dan. I'm the head of legal sales here at Shieldpay. I'll be hosting the conversation today, so really looking forward to making this an engaging session. Alongside me is my colleague, Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Hi all. So, business development manager here at Shieldpay, client-facing, so speak with a lot of law firms, and keen to get into the nuts and bolts of the journey over the last couple of years and the pressures, so to speak, that are on now on the law firms.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, so plenty to cover. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a summary on what we're going to cover today. We'll be starting the session by looking back over sort of the first half of 2023, talking through the current state of the M&A market and addressing some of the key challenges that lawyers are up against as they're managing these deals through the final months for the year and into 2024. We'll be doing a deep dive into how law firms are managing these transactional payment requirements and how partnering with a payment provider can simplify what is becoming an ever increasingly complex process. In this, we'll be touching on key payment pain points like KYC, global payouts, which are becoming an increasing challenge for our clients and clients like such as yourselves, so they're looking to overcome. We're going to leave around sort of 5 to 10 minutes, all being well, at the end. You're more than welcome to post questions through this webinar. They'll be picked up by our team, and hopefully we'll address all of the questions that come through at the end, and we'll leave that 10-minute session at the end. There's a chat function on the side of the screen. You can submit your questions and comments to us. All messages will be sent directly to the team. So let's get started. So the M&A market has seen a reduction in activity this year. Looking at the first sort of 5 months of the year, some of the recent publications said that currently there's around sort of circa 44% decrease in market value, from about 1.14 trillion to 732 billion. In Q1 of this year, we saw the lowest first quarter figure since 2015 as well, which is important to note. This is a substantial decrease. Keen to know, Alan, from yourself, if you could talk us through what you feel are some of the causes for change and why we're seeing such a decrease in these deals.
Yeah, Dev, I think the obvious one is the macroeconomic climate. Interest rates have risen significantly over the past year. With that, money is more expensive, capital is more expensive, and I think the private equity firms and those that were structuring deals perhaps with debt are looking at either other avenues to do so or to reduce that debt piece, which I think has led to a reduction. And also, we don't know where this climate is going. Right, it's a lot of uncertainty. So I think there's some people there that are sitting on hands or perhaps taking longer to do deals as they otherwise would have.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, a significant shift in the market over recent years. I suppose not just in 2023. It's been increasing length of time needed to close these deals as well. Deal lag, as it's been termed in the industry. The deal process from kind of the initial scoping and negotiation stages through to the payment execution. So the overall time to close has increased by about 30% over the past 10 years. And actually, the median time to close deals in Q1 2023 was the slowest since 2008, with 71% of all deals taking at least 70 days to complete. What, in your opinion, Alan, and you're closer to the industry than probably most, what do you think are some of the major causes for this?
Yeah, so what I'm definitely hearing from the law firms is there's a lot more due diligence that is going on throughout these deals. So not just at the beginning, it's literally throughout. So we do have some deals that unfortunately fall at the last hurdle. And I think this is down to the fact that there's more pressure on getting these decisions correct for the business, for the buyer. The sellers also need to be deal ready. And by deal ready, it's not just in a position to sell, but it's having a good enough future view in terms of their, if it's a tech company, their tech stack, their roadmap, does that align with the buyers? I think there's a lot more scrutiny that's going into making the right acquisitions now. In a market that is precarious. Again, we don't know where these interest rates are going. There's a lot of pressures, so the right decision needs to be made, and that is inevitably slowing down that deal lag quite considerably.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's definitely safe to say that the market conditions are challenging. The downturn in the market is quite typically affecting people or people within that chain, typically legal profession, M&A teams advising on them deals. It feels as there's been a lot of start-stop, extra stages, negotiations, much deeper research required to get these deals solidified, putting extra pressure on legal professionals as well. So being the main point of contact for our clients, essentially in the legal sphere, Alan, what have you been hearing about some of the challenges that they are facing and having to navigate in the market?
Yeah, so I think we've almost seen a somewhat of a shift in terms of the view that some of the law firms are having on deals. So there's a lot more awareness of risk. Obvious example is cyber attacks are at an all-time high. There's more complex deals. So there's sometimes deals where there's more payees, so more sellers, which makes it inevitably more complex, not just on the payment side, but on the due diligence and KYC front. And then you've got the pressures coming down from the regulators. So you've got the SRA putting a lot of pressure on law firms to minimize or sometimes stop the use of the client accounts, which is then changing how these law firms are transacting and ultimately settling these deals. Causes a lot of frustrations for the law firms at the moment. There's a lot of pressures on that risk piece, regulatory risk and financial risk, etc. So we're certainly hearing those pain points coming through from the law firms.
Makes sense. So what's next, Alan? In quite a tumultuous time for legal firms involved in this process, how can lawyers respond effectively to these changes, these challenges, overcome some of the, I suppose, inefficiencies you talked about, and essentially providing high quality legal services to their clients? How do they get their deals done in a more streamlined manner?
Yeah, so I think it's very key to look ahead. Hopefully we're going to see this deal flow pick up. I mean, there are deals in the pipeline, but essentially the same amount of deals are in that pipeline in the M&A world. It's just they are taking longer. So being deal ready and prepared for that deal is critical. So that a lot of that is the due diligence beforehand. It's the KYC. It's making sure that is in order. It avoids any potential delays. Make sure that when that SPA is signed, things can move quickly from there on. Whereas 18 months, 2 years ago, it was usually sign the SPA and then do the due diligence. We're now seeing it's almost front loaded, where that KYC and due diligence is provided earlier on than it otherwise would have been. And I think that's key in terms of taking advantage of a shift that we will hopefully see in that M&A market.
Interesting. So preparation is key. Yeah, and I suppose ensuring that you have the right partners in place to support that, whatever the services that are required for the underlying client is crucial. You mentioned about partners getting the support on the deal early. Today we're talking about essentially payment partners as well. Can you give me an overview of the role of a payment partner in this process, essentially, and the different payment approaches a law firm can take when it comes to completing M&A transactions? I think that'd be really useful for people.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a number of ways that law firms are settling these transactions. So some would settle direct, which is fairly straightforward if you've got a small amount of parties overall. There is then the use of the client account, which, as I said, is having a little bit more scrutiny and more eyes on that from the SRA. So there's somewhat reluctance to settle in that manner. And then you've got the paying agent providers, and almost separate to that is, if there's an escrow piece, you either need a banking partner or a paying agent or escrow provider to help support that. I think there is that shift is happening where there's more leaning on external support for that settlement of those transactions.
Makes sense. Yeah. We're seeing sort of the adoption of technologies and more engagement with third parties around all different types of services, not just payment partners. So it's interesting to see that shift. We talk about sort of the options available to law firms? It'd be interesting to take sort of a closer look at the evaluating these in a bit more detail. You covered the key considerations when choosing how to manage essentially the payments, but how can legal teams determine who is the right partner for them?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think a lot of it would depend on that structure of the deal, the complexity of that deal, and also, I guess the amount of parties involved is probably a key point as well. I mean, as an example, we are now getting involved earlier in that KYC piece, trying to take that away from the law firms. But then there's also the FX piece is now very, forefront as well, in terms of some clients have been punished, so to speak, if they've been sent the wrong currency. When the law firms used to settle through the client accounts, for example, if you sent dollars to a sterling bank, that client ends up paying that fee. So they are looking for payment providers as well to handle that cross-border transactions in a more effective manner, so that the client isn't seeing those costs. And as I say, I think it is that shift that we're seeing. A lot of it is just moving that risk and moving that administrative burden away from the law firm, letting them focus on doing what they do, and then finding a trusted partner to handle the rest.
Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. And trust is key, right? In these complex, high-value transactions, trust and credibility is key, right?
Definitely, yeah.
So could you explain a little bit more detail? You mentioned some of the intricacies of that as well, but how Shieldpay's technology levels up from sort of traditional payment providers. You mentioned some of the points, but it'd be good to just delve a bit deeper into that if possible.
Yeah, so we get involved at an earlier stage. So I always encourage our law firms to let us know at the earliest possible time when they can see a deal happening. We would go out and collect KYC, update them weekly as to where we are with that.
Yeah.
Gives them peace of mind knowing that that's handled. It frees up the junior members as well to focus on development. You don't want a junior coming in and just doing administrative tasks. But it's also the security and tech stack as well, which I think we'll probably get into perhaps later on. But it is ultimately that trust piece. It's finding someone that you can trust to take that risk, cost, and admin burden away.
I suppose in some respects of that as well, you're trying to create what would be as frictionless journey as possible for the lawyer representing and ultimately the underlying client.
Definitely, yeah. You want a frictionless, streamlined transaction, and I think that customer journey is also, high up that law firm's priority list, as well as making that journey good for their end client as well.
Absolutely. No, that's key, alongside the trust and credibility piece for sure. Do you think there's anything, Alan, that for the attendees that are listening today would be important to share about Shieldpay with the audience? Yeah,
so essentially what we do is split quite simply into three sections, right? So we verify funds. So when we're receiving funds in these M&A transactions, we know who the funds are coming from. We know what jurisdictions they're from, any sanctions or PEPs checks. We also then would verify the payees. So we know, again, who we're paying, where they are, but we also verify their bank through open banking. So this is not only ensuring that we know who it is that we're paying, we know which currency their bank is, and we know, more importantly, that these funds will get there with this bank. So it avoids any bouncing of payments, any delays in that payment. We then hold funds in safeguarded accounts, again, SCA regulated, so that's peace of mind for a number of large clients out there that are doing these M&A transactions. And then we have the ability, due to our tech stack, to disperse funds to a high volume of payees in very short order. We do a number of class actions where we're paying out tens of thousands of claimants. So it's very business as usual for us. Whereas the law firm, especially if they're using a client account, what you don't want is for that to either take time or have someone taking that risk that they perhaps aren't operationally set up to take.
And do you reckon that covers off the key differentials, Alan, between sort of the usage of a client account versus the Shieldpay proposition, that sort of the pay scale, etc.?
Yeah, certainly. And the next slide is probably a good one to jump into there, because it shows where we are getting involved in these transactions early on, and where that admin burden is almost, freeing up the law firm. So, as I say, early on, we get involved in a deal. We're working with the lawyer there to understand the granular of that transaction and advising as to which contracts we have would be best suited for that transaction. Now, these can be edited, within reason to mold to the transaction. We would then ask for a list of parties involved, so typically name and email address. And, again, we go out, we get that KYC, we'll update weekly as to where we are. We might lean on them, for a polite nudge to anyone that's perhaps being slow to give us that documentation. And then we've got the banking infrastructure. So we have the bank account, which will then receive funds into. And part of that is, as I say, that verification piece. So we know that funds can go to this payee's account, which currency, etc., which makes the disbursement of funds a lot quicker as well. So ideally, what we want is to be told there's a deal, and here's who is involved. The next they hear from us is everyone's KYC complete, and here are the bank details. And the next thing, everyone's got their money. Again, streamlining transactions where we can.
That is frictionless.
Yeah,
I like it. Very good. So, anybody that's maybe attended today that resonates with, if they have a deal pending, deal coming in the pipeline, something they're working on, they're getting that pre-deal stage set up now. So, what are the next steps of anybody on this webinar or within their network? What are the next steps if they have a deal pending? Would they have to do in order to sort of liaise and engage with Shieldpay? What would they need to do?
Yeah, so we have a deal information form, which we can send out after this. We just ask there for the finer details of that transaction, how many parties, the jurisdictions that they're in. From there, we then have a scoping call. So within 2 hours, we'll reach out and book a 15-minute call to understand then the finer details of that transaction. What we're trying to get in that call is to understand what agreement is best suited. And then we'll go through the next steps, KYC requirements, etc. As I say, it's all to try and take that burden away and ultimately speed up the end-to-end deal flow.
And the slide that we're looking at here, Alan, is just that, it's the comparables, right? So typically some of the pain points that lawyers operating in these M&A transactions would go through, that admin heavy, that complex, just to summarize this slide.
Yeah, certainly. So it's just highlighting essentially where that shift is happening. So, it is inherently an admin heavy transaction that we have then streamlined. What we're, trying to emphasize here is that our goal, and what we do very well, I believe, is that we shift the risk and the admin burden and the cost burden away from lawyers and ultimately make that transaction safer and faster.
Great, that's really helpful. I'm going to open up the floor. Thanks, Alan. That was really insightful, really in-depth look at the market and some of the pain points that lawyers are dealing with, professional services clients are dealing with as well. I'll open the floor to questions now from the team. Let me just have a look if there's any questions coming in. Just bear me 1 second. Yeah, so I've got a question in. Alan, I'll chuck this over to yourself. Can you talk through, because you're so, I suppose, heavily involved in this. Can you talk us through what the end-to-end payments journey with Shieldpay looks like?
Yeah, okay. So we'll assume in this instance that KYC has already been complete. So what that payment process looks like is the bank details and a unique project code will be provided to the payer. Funds are then held in our safeguarded account. We've got a number of banking partners, so tier 1 banks that we have in a safeguarded account. We then ask for a release notice to be sent for that transaction, and the signatories on that release notice would be dependent and pre-agreed in the agreement, the underlying agreement. And once we've got that release notice, we'll then disperse funds within 2 hours. Now if we're talking, 100, 200 payees, what we usually ask for is, let's have a disbursement before the release notice, so we're more prepared. But typically within 2 hours, we can settle transactions.
That's great. Thank you, Alan. That's really helpful. I don't believe we've had any further questions come in yet. I think we touched on some of the the slides around sort of that regulatory piece as well. Just another question that's come in now, Alan. Pricing wise, how is the Shieldpay pricing mechanism look like? What does that look like?
Yeah, so great question, hard one to answer, but I can give you the variables on which we price. Yeah. So what we look for is how many parties are involved, the jurisdictions, where these people are based, and that usually is the complexity of that transaction. How many payments out? So in some M&A transactions, there might be several tranches going out to payees.
Yeah.
If there's an escrow piece, and then the length of that escrow as well. So I guess the good news there is that once we've had that call to establish that transaction and understand it completely, the price provided is the price. There's no upkeep costs on escrow, no additional fees unless you are extending and changing that underlying agreement.
Understand. You mentioned just in that passage there, Alan, about jurisdiction. Is there any limitations on jurisdictions?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's probably around 20 jurisdictions that we are, shall I say, cautious in dealing with, and they're, I believe, the FCA and SRA would stipulate those, and they're the obvious jurisdictions. Outside of that, we can typically work with them, and that is also on currencies as well. So we've got partnerships in place to allow us to do the FX at source. So we're sending the right currency to the right banks. We've built up this infrastructure in Shieldpay to enable us to have that flexibility on cross-border transactions.
That's really helpful, Alan. We just had another question come in. Really good question. I'll keep firing them at you. You mentioned very early in this conversation about some of the projects that you'd worked on. Could you, I know there's a degree of sensitivity around some of these, but could you give us some examples of some of the other projects that you've worked on and what they look like?
Yeah, certainly. So we've recently worked on a project earlier this year. It's around 250 million transaction with about 250 payees. Mm-hmm. In that model, we did all the KYC, so we did the outreach for those payees, onboarded everyone, handled those transactions, and paid out to, I believe it was around 7 currencies. Mm-hmm. And the feedback that we had there from the law firm is that had significantly reduced their, firstly, touch points in terms of the admin side, but reduced the time from KYC starting to deal being complete. Another one that we are completing on is a very sizable transaction, 450 payees in 18 different countries. So there's a large FX piece here. Again, we're doing all that KYC, taking that away from the law firm. Mm-hmm. And the feedback that we're getting there is that, we're ultimately saving them that admin time, but also the hours as well. Usually KYC is either, for a law firm, unbillable hours, or would eat into their fixed fee. And it's a very difficult conversation to go back to their client to say, look, we spent a bit too much on admin and KYC. We need to increase our fee. It's a hard one to increase the fee on.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That's really helpful. You can see how that administrative burden can mount up, right? So taking that pain away is a real value add, no doubt, for the underlying clients as well. So another question just come in. Are there any other use cases outside of M&A for your services? We can have a look. I'll field that question to you, but equally I can add a little bit after.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you're probably closer. My focus is predominantly M&A, but we are involved in litigation, class action lawsuits. One of our products as well is third-party managed accounts. But yeah, Dan, you might be able to elaborate more, because I say my day-to-day is that M&A piece.
Yeah, I think it'd be just to elaborate a little bit further on litigation. You've already touched on the key 3 elements for verify, hold, and disperse. And typically in a litigation case, you've got lots of parties to verify. You have a holding element to that transaction, whilst the parties are verified as well, as in the claimants. And then you have a mass payout pool, essentially. So where the challenges can be in that scenario is having that speed of verification, that holding element, and mass disbursement angle. So litigation is a really good example of another use case that we use. Also, sort of construction, milestone-based payments. That's quite an interesting one that we're looking at as well, and starting to do a lot more work in that environment, where essentially milestones have to be met for payments to be executed upon. What we would do, again, it comes back to the same three principles, where we'd verify, hold, and disperse. But where we would have in that scenario is conditions that needed to be met so that payments could be made again. And yeah, where there's potentially uncertainty in transactions, or we talked about it earlier in this session around trust and credibility. Well, our escrow capability that can be applied to all of the verticals that we've just spoken about there mitigates that risk, and the use of an escrow with an agreed conditions that needed to be met offers a lot of value into lots of different verticals, from construction to trade finance to litigation to payments. So as long as the elements are there, where there is a requirement to verify parties hold funds and pay funds out under conditions, then it can be applied to lots of different verticals as well. Excellent. Okay. I don't believe there's any further questions from the wider group. Alan, really appreciate that deeper dive. Thank you for that. And a big thank you to everybody that's joined us on this webinar today. If you wanted to reach out to us, please feel free to go onto the Shieldpay website. We've got a call to action there where you can touch base with our sales team, customer service team from there. Otherwise, reach out to us directly. We're on LinkedIn. If you have any further questions, typically in these sessions, further questions come post these sessions taking place. So if you have any further questions, reach out to myself or Alan. We'd be happy to help and support, and hopefully you can take some value from this session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.